Welcome back to Crowned and Called. I'm your host, Alexis, and we are in the series of Pregnant with Promise. Let's get into September, the fragility of early promises, the first hidden trimester. Continue. So, last month we talked about August, about conception, about the hidden cellular beginning of a promise that God was forming inside of me. Even when I couldn't see it, I couldn't feel it, and I definitely couldn't prove it, there was something forming. However, August pretty much ended in silence. There was no call, there was no breakthrough, no midnight manifestation as I was hoping for, just silence and a promise that I was still holding on to. But now it's September, and natural pregnancy, weeks 5 through 8, are when everything gets both more real and more fragile at the same time. See, the heartbeat begins, and you're able to physically hear it as a mom, the small, flickering proof that what was invisible inside of you is now undeniably alive. But the systems are still forming. The organs are still developing. Nothing is finished, nothing is stable, and the risk of loss is still very, very present. That's September. The promise gets a heartbeat this month, but fragile things require a different kind of faith than strong things do. Fragile things require you to carry them carefully, to grip not too hard, to not still shake things up when things are trying to settle. This month teaches me that the hard way. All right, let's get into day 23, waiting on the other side of the fast. September 1st, let's just call this the morning after. For me, it's day 23 of no contact, and I wake up feeling the weight of that. I'm not discouraged per se, but I'm disappointed. I know that sounds like it's probably the same thing, but it's not really, because discouragement is like the promise doesn't exist anymore. Disappointment says the promise is real, and I expected it to be here by now, and it's just not here yet. And at this point, I'm in the second category. And I played through every possible version of how this could still be okay. Maybe he's waiting, the extra 3 days that theologians say that it takes to receive revelation. Maybe September 5th is the date still because I have this whole fifth day thing. And maybe that's when he'll process and that's the first time we'll get to speak. Or maybe most logically, he probably just fell asleep last night after a long drive and he's just going to call me sometime this morning. And then I see something. He's followed me back on Instagram now. So that means he's awake and he's online. But it also means he still hasn't reached out. So at this point, I'm just like, you know what? I'm going to call him. And maybe that was wrong. I can own up to that. But I did it. And he didn't even answer. And I still had to sit with that. But even then, in that specific sting of calling and not getting an answer, I'm still not giving up on the promise because God told me that we were going to reconnect by Friday. And it's still not Friday yet. In pregnancy, the days just after conception are some of the most uncertain days. The embryo has formed, but it hasn't yet signaled the body loudly enough to stop the natural cycle. There's a window where everything that's being formed could still be lost, not because it wasn't real, but because the body hasn't fully registered what happened yet. I'm in that window. Real, but not registered. All right, September 2nd through 7th. This is kind of all mumble jumbled together because it was a lot of things happening all at once. But I'll say the began. We finally reconnect. And I want to tell this part really carefully because it matters how I tell it. So he did reach back out. We talked. And for a moment, for this brief, beautiful moment, everything I believed feels like it's right there within reach. And then he tells me something I was not prepared for. He's honest with me, transparent in a way that I always asked him to be, the way I specifically requested, even when it's a hard truth. And he tells me that he wants to explore other women, that he's not ready to come back to full exclusivity, that he'd like to continue things with me while he's still figuring things out with others. And I want you to hear this. I don't think he was coming from a place of malicious intent. Like I said, he was being honest, he was being transparent, he was giving me the respect of knowing where he was at instead of just stringing me along in the dark. So I can appreciate that. And honestly, that kind of reflects the man that I know him to be, someone that's always trying to do right by others. And in this case, the right thing was just getting a little messy. But I also know that even though I toiled with the idea, it's ultimately something I can't accept. So I declined, not in anger, but from a place of like quiet, settled self knowledge that I kind of have been building in myself throughout the month of August being in separation. And I know that I'm carrying this promise. I know that God has given me a calling and spoken to me. And I know that, like, I shouldn't settle for a partial version of a promise, you know? So I say no, and I hold myself together in the moment in a way that honestly even surprised myself. I didn't explode on him. I didn't beg or desperately plead, like, let's just be exclusive. I didn't, go back and forth with it too much. I was like, okay, we'll be friends. I gave him grace and I gave myself regulation. And I feel like I was becoming the woman that knows the difference between my wants and my worth, right? Because I can want him, but at the same time, I have to value what I'm worth. In early pregnancy, the heartbeat begins, but the systems are still unstable. Life is real and present, but it cannot yet sustain itself outside of the womb. The heart is beating, but the lungs aren't formed. That was like us. The love between us was real, the connection was real, but the promise was not ready to be delivered. And one thing I've learned, if anything, is that you cannot manufacture readiness. So I just had to wait. September 10th, vulnerability over pride. Something shifts around September 10th. It's early morning, 4 a.m. type early morning, and I've actually been up in prayer. Not all night, but how you just get waking up in the middle of the night. And this is the type of prayer that is not necessarily words that I'm saying, but just being in God's presence, because at this point I'm just tired of waiting. I'm feeling drained. And in this moment, unexpectedly, he calls me. My kingdom spouse calls me at like 4 in the morning. And I honestly just open up my heart to him because I had been praying already about our situation, of course. And I just felt like, okay, this is a sign. Like, I'm gonna just sit here and I'm gonna be vulnerable with him. And I tell him like what I actually want, like not this gracious, self-regulated, polished, I gotta know my worth type of woman, not necessarily fully trying to protect my dignity or my pride, pretending that like my needs aren't real, but just kind of like being authentic with him. I tell him like I want to be exclusive. I want us back. I want what we had and I believe that we're meant to be together. And there's something so terrifying about like saying that out loud when you're in like this in between space because you love this person, but like just telling them exactly what you want really puts yourself out there, especially if you don't know if they're gonna meet you there. And especially in my case, when the signs was given, he wasn't ready to meet me there. And it's like once you put it out there, you can't kind of like brush it off and act like you don't want it anymore. You can't really pretend it doesn't hurt. You can't say you don't care because it's like you're showing your hand. But like I said, I felt like it was a sign that this is what I needed to do in this moment. So instead of pretending, which wasn't really protecting me anyway, I put myself out there. And I think with a fragile promise, vulnerability was required. And that's something that I learned. And just like in pregnancy, the soft tissue has to stay soft in order for the bones to form correctly around it. Hardening too early, or in my case, protecting yourself too aggressively, can interrupt development. So I tried to stay soft, even though it was super scary. September 14th, reassurance signs return. So I just want to say, after I put myself out there and told him what I wanted, his tune like didn't change in that moment. He was still not ready. So I took it back to God and I'm like, God, is this the person? Because it's not looking like that. And so as I'm driving, I was probably in my head at the time, probably like replaying that conversation that we had and honestly just making every worst case scenario, right? And then I see three yellow cars like back to back to back. And I just feel like a sense of peace returned to me because, the yellow cars are what I asked in the beginning of this journey that God gave me. A yellow car isn't a binding contract from God, but like I said, it was a memory for me. Those 3 yellow cars were a reminder that God was gently nudging me and saying, hey, I'm still here. The promise is still true, and I'm still working on your behalf. And in pregnancy, there's a period between the first positive test and the first ultrasound where you're not allowed to hear the heartbeat yet, but you know you're pregnant. Like logically, you know it, but you can't feel a baby, you can't see a baby, and the fear that something can be going wrong can overwhelm you. But then you hear that little flutter on the monitor and you exhale. The yellow cars were my flutter. A small reassurance, a little God wink that life is still here. September 16th, grace markers in fragile seasons. I want to mention September 16th briefly because it belongs here. There's a moment this month that I'll tell the full story on another time, but a moment where God is just showing up for me in such a specific, detailed, only God kind of way that it's going to deserve its own space. But what I'll say here is this: there are moments in fragile seasons where God gives you what I can only call a grace marker. Moments that have no practical explanation, moments that seem almost too on the nose, like too perfectly timed, too specifically personal to be a coincidence. September 16th is one of those moments for me. And all I felt this day, in a season full of uncertainty and fragility and unanswered questions, was peace. God gives grace markers in fragile seasons, not always as answers, sometimes just as reminders that He hasn't forgotten where you are. And like I said, I'm going to do a whole segment on September 16th later, so stick around. September 21st, crowning confusion. By September 21st, I am tired. That's the only honest way I can say it. And I'm tired in a way that goes beyond just needing sleep. Like my spirit is tired. I'm tired of carrying something invisible while the world around me moves in visible, tangible ways. I write in my journal, September 16th, I believe I'm crowning. Like the promise is right there. It's on the edge. I can feel it, but the delivery's not here. And the next thought that I have, because I tend to catastrophize, is that maybe I'm having a stillbirth. Like maybe I went through all of this and I'm gonna push out a dead promise. And I write that out. I put it on the page in my journal because even in the middle of deep faith, fear is allowed to have a sentence. Not a paragraph though, a sentence. And then I allow God to speak. And when God speaks, it really recalibrates my faith. God reminds me that in a natural pregnancy, both people create the baby. The promise involves both of me and my kingdom spouse in this sense. But in pregnancy, only one person is carrying the labor and all the pain. And the mother is the one who has that. She's the one that feels every contraction, every pressure, every moment of intensity. And the father doesn't even experience it the same way. And that's not a failure. That's just the nature of how new life comes through the world. And I think that my situation is no different in my spiritual pregnancy. This promise requires one heart to bear the visible pain, while the other one doesn't fully understand what's happening yet. And that wasn't something that was supposed to make me resentful towards my kingdom spouse. It was just the anatomy of how this assignment played out. The same way that you shouldn't resent, your husband when you're carrying his physical child and he's fine. So, yes, I'm the one in labor pains. I'm the one in pregnancy pains, I should say. And he's kind of oblivious. And I had to be okay with that. All right, September 22nd, when the season changes before you feel it. Autumn officially begins on September 22nd in Maryland. And I step outside and it still feels like summer. The heat hasn't broken yet, the leaves haven't changed. Nothing looks any different than it did yesterday, but it's a new season. And I sit with that tension, the gap between what has officially shifted and what has visibly shifted. And I realized this is exactly what I'm living in. God had already declared a new season over my life and over my promise. The spiritual calendar is already turned, but I was still standing in summer heat, waiting to feel the relief of fall. Today, I reach out to my kingdom spouse. Not anxiously, just gently. And honestly, I just tell him, hey, like, I'm at peace. I don't have much to say to you these days, but I just want you to know, like, I'm okay. And he responds, concerned and caring because I'm not usually one to not talk much, but he kind of picks up what I'm putting down, and that matters to me. Like, even though it was something so small of like saying like, hey, I'm fine, I'm not talking, him just kind of like recognizing that and seeing that I was in surrender and being able to acknowledge that really meant a lot to me. And it helped me really understand something, that a season can shift before the sensation catches up. And just like in early pregnancy, the body is already doing something entirely new internally. But externally, everything can look the same. The shift is real even before it's visible to others. The new season is real before you may feel it. I, I'm in a new season, even though it still kind of feels like August. September 23rd, when the promise gets shape. September 23rd is Rosh Hashanah. That's the Jewish New Year. I do some research and I find out that this season that we're in is called Teshuvah, I think, and it runs from late August through October 1st. And it symbolizes breakthrough, fruitfulness, multiplication, a turning point, a cosmic shift, pit to the palace. Like, I am getting so excited. And one of the most sacred days during this period is September 22nd to October 1st. Like, that is the breaking point of miracles. So I think about how, all of August, I felt like September was going to be a shift, something was going to be born. And I realized, like, it never said September 1st, it never said September 5th. Like, I just was receiving signs that like something was going to happen in September. And in my human mind, I did try to like pick and point and pin a date on it, but it was just that something was going to shift into September. So since I found out that, the Jewish holiday goes all the way to October 1st, I was like, okay, like I have to stick out all of September. Like, I still have time left in this month. There's 7, 8 more days. Like, I'm gonna stand 10 toes. So I decide that I'm gonna hold my faith at least until October 1st. And not, just from a place of like, oh, I'm so desperate, like something has to happen, but also just like I'm discerning, like something literally is changing in the spiritual realm, because of this Jewish holiday, because of the Jewish New Year. We know that Jesus was Jewish. So I'm like, okay, things are going to shift. And after I decide this, I feel like God is giving me signs again. Like I said, these are kind of like little God winks. So it's the yellow cars again, and I'm driving, and yellow cars are just appearing. Not one, not two, but like there was over 10 yellow vehicles in 1 hour, y'all. Like, I'm not even lying. It was cars, it was trucks, it was vans, and then some of them had maroon cars like right next to them. And at one point, I'm like, just in prayer, like, God, if first, middle, last name is still my promise, then like let me know that this is like an undeniable sign from you. And then I'm listening to, I guess, like scrolling through videos. You can have it on autoplay TikTok while you're driving. And one of the videos is actually from my pastor, and he says, God's not done yet. And then as I'm in the car, a song comes on my Pandora. Yes, y'all, I'm old school. I still listen to Pandora. And the song comes on and it says the same thing, God's not done yet. So I'm like, okay, God. Okay, God. Like, I'm going to listen. It's okay. I'm going to wait it out. Like I said, we still got time left in September. So I'm in a good place. And then my kingdom spouse calls me. And, it's seemingly random, but looking back, I can see all the alignment. Like, I got to a place of peace. I got to a place of surrendering again and saying, okay, I'm going to keep waiting. And when he calls me, he's like, he misses me. He loves me. He said he's going to get a new gym membership so he can be around less women. I said, okay, clock it. He said that he's going to go to therapy for real. Like, he just like really seems like he's turning a new leaf. And I'm like, okay, God, I see you. And, I'm not egging him on too much, but I'm hearing him out. And like I said, I'm just giving God the glory at this point because, of course, he doesn't know about the cars and everything. But Again, like I'm in this pregnancy bubble, right? So this is kind of like an ultrasound moment for me. Because in pregnancy, your first ultrasound is when the promise starts to really get shape. You believed it was real, you had the pregnancy test, you felt it inside, but the ultrasound is when you can like see it in 3 days sometimes. Is when it finally has a form, when it exists outside of your own conviction and becomes like a visible evidence. And our phone call, like him calling me right after the signs and the surrender, like that was like my first ultrasound moment. Yes, my promise had a heartbeat already, but now it has shape. Like it's very much alive. So super exciting stuff for me. Moving on to being seen by God. A prophecy came in my life on September 25th, and someone spoke words over my life that were so specific, and they have a personal weight of something that I feel like only came from God. It wasn't like generic cookie cutter encouragement, not some overarching broad positivity message, but something that like reached me exactly where I was at, where I had been standing, and kind of like it was just God's way of saying, I see you. And I felt so known, not just from this person speaking, but like I said, from God, because I'm like, God is using this person. And it was so special to me because I've been in church my whole life, and like I never get picked out of the lineup to like the pastor or the evangelist or whoever just prophet just start speaking prophetic words. Like that never happens to me, and I've always wanted that to happen. So it was just so surreal to me, like in the midst of going through this early stages of pregnancy and everything that I've been experiencing, that this is the time that God decides to like pinpoint me and have a prophecy come to me. Like I felt so special and seen by God. And something that I've really been slowly learning is that God will sometimes send confirmation through other people, and like based on what he's already told you in private. Even like through my TikToks, technically that's God using people to speak, even though those people don't know me. But one thing about when you're receiving confirmation through other people, like it should align with what God's already been telling you, like in your private time. What you're receiving shouldn't contradict what God has already been speaking to you. It shouldn't be some brand new theology, in the matter of two or three witnesses, a matter is established. So it should just be like an echo of what God has already been telling you, a louder form of that direction, than what you've already been hearing in your quiet time with the Lord. And so, since what she was saying was in alignment, I didn't have to kind of manufacture anything. I didn't have to kind of ponder it or chase it or be confused about it, because I was able to just receive it, because I'm like, okay, God, you've already been telling me this, and now like it solidifies. So in pregnancy, there are external validations of internal life. There's a doctor who confirms the heartbeat that you've been sensing, the little flutters that you felt. There's a test result that matches what your body has been telling you. The confirmation is not what created the life, it just witnessed it. And September 25th is when someone witnessed what God had already been forming inside of me. September 29th, the double minded swing. Okay, I know, don't kill me. I just had this powerful, amazing spiritual moment, and then September 29th happens. I wake up and I feel so free. The fog has lifted. I can see reality. And what I see is maybe I'm wrong. Like, maybe I just misheard God. Maybe everything was just a coincidence. Maybe the yellow cars were just yellow cars. And I know I've been here already with you guys, but I get on dating apps, and that day I look at probably like over 100 profiles. I text somebody from church asking them like, "Hey, can you set me up with someone?" And I even tell my kingdom spouse like, "You know what? I think I just heard God wrong." I go to small group that night. I'm like, "Hey, I've been believing for this promise, and honestly, I just woke up today and I don't believe anymore." And my small group was like, there's no shame in mistaking what God said, but moving forward, you do need to be cautious. And I just want to be honest with you guys about this moment, because it was real. And if you are also going through a season of waiting on a promise, then you've probably had a September 29th, a day where the faith just ran out, where you feel like you've been carrying something invisible for so long that you'd rather just put it down rather than keep wondering if it's real. And that was the feeling that I had completely. But here's what I've been learning through those moments: it was really fear and doubt. And fear and doubt destabilize what God is still trying to form. In an embryonic development, the early systems are highly sensitive to disruption. Stress, hormones, they really do affect the development on a cellular level. The fragile stage isn't just an emotional description, it's a biological reality. So, my double mindedness, going back and forth, one day I'm believing, the next day I don't anymore, all based on a feeling, like that wasn't a moral failure, but it definitely was a huge destabilizer. And I had to recognize that. And of course, I come back to my faith. I always come back. I always believe again. But September 29th reminded me that the enemy of the promise isn't always opposition externally. Sometimes it's you being exhausted within. September 30th, what your sleep tells you when you're too tired to listen when you're awake. September ends with two dreams, one good, one hard. The good one I can barely hold on to. Something about rainbow flowers, about him, about something sweet and full of color, but then it slips away before I can fully catch it. The hard one, that one stays with me longer. We're in a parking lot and we get split up just like casually to let's just see who can get to the car first. But on my way to the car, something bad happens to me. Something is done to me that I didn't ask for, that I didn't deserve. And when I tell people about what happened to me, they blame my kingdom spouse because technically he left me, instead of just blaming the person who attacked me. And I wake up and I sit with that after my dream. And I think the dream is showing me something real. That there are seasons where going separate ways, even briefly, even innocently, can leave you exposed in ways you didn't anticipate. And the grief of that isn't always about who's to blame. Sometimes it's just about how much you needed that person and they weren't there. I'm not going to overinterpret that dream, but it is something that I made a note of. September ends also without any delivery, but it ends different than August did. In August, that silence, it felt like emptiness. It was heartbreak. But in September, the silence feels like something that has a little weight to it. Like there's something real here, even though I can't touch it. My promise has a heartbeat, it has shape, I've heard it, and I've seen it. Oh, y'all. Okay, so September definitely almost broke me in some ways. And I think that's really important to just say plainly because I don't want anyone that's listening to this to think that faith means you don't almost break. Sometimes it means you do break, but that you keep going anyway. And that's honestly where you find courage. Not in the absence of fear, not in the absence of doubt, but courage is continuing to carry what God gave you. Even when your arms are shaking, even when you can't tell anymore if your baby is still alive, even when everyone around you seems to be receiving what you're still waiting on. I want to speak to the person who's in their September right now. The person who heard something from God clearly, specifically, personally, and has been watching the gap between what God said and what they see. The person who has had their first ultrasound moment, heard the heartbeat, but then gone home and wondered if they imagined it. You didn't imagine it. Fragile does not mean false. Unstable does not mean lost. The system still forming doesn't mean that life isn't real. What God spoke over your life in a prayer, in a quiet moment, in a sign you didn't even know you were looking for, that word has not expired. It will not return void. It hasn't been revoked. It hasn't floated away just because you had a hard month, maybe even a hard year. It is in the womb still. Fragile, yes. Still developing, yes. But alive. Stay with it. Not because it's easy, but because easy was never the assignment. The assignment was courage. Trust God, seek Him first, stay patient and faithful, and expect restoration, abundance, and blessings in His perfect timing. That was what I wrote in my prayer journal in September. I didn't fully believe it when I wrote it, but I kept showing up anyways. And that's all September really asks of you, to keep showing up.